Story 1. No proper reconciliation after an argument. After receiving harsh words and disciplinary measures, we will just go to dinner later as if nothing happened. Story 2. Mom cooking 3 meals a day and the whole family having dinner together every night. I only recently realized how lucky I was to have parents who spent so much time with us, with a stay-at-home mom and a dad who would be at home by 6 every night. Story 3. Put a brick on the oven rack. When I moved out, a friend asked me about it and I realized I didn't know why, I just always did. I asked my mom and she didn't know either. She asked her mom, and she nearly died laughing. My grandmother's oven rack was warped, and a brick helped keep it balanced. Story 4. Argue and bicker every day, multiple times a day. Almost every conversation between them turns into an argument. It still does. Story 5. My parents constantly told me that everyone could see my flaws and thought less of me. It's just that no one says it to my face because they have nothing to gain by doing so. But as my parents and family, it was their responsibility to tell me what was wrong with me so I could fix myself. I spent decades of my life staying indoors because I believed everyone was talking negatively about me in their heads, behind my back, and so on. I believed that it was normal and natural for people to treat me badly because I am that much of a horrible being. No explanation needed because I was taught people wouldn't say why to my face, and it would all go away if I could just be better. Story 6. Only putting $5 to $10 in the gas tank at a time. We never filled the tank all the way up. I thought it was normal to only get gas to get to the places you absolutely have to go. I didn't realize this was different until I moved. We were just really poor and ultimately not in the greatest financial situation. My grandparents still do this. I filled up her car with my own money this past holiday, and my grandma got so mad because gas is expensive. Story 7. In our household, we grew up eating cereal with warm or hot milk. I didn't know that was not the case for everyone around me. Story 8. Spent a long weekend at my friend's place once and thought I heard his mom yelling at him while I was in the shower. When we were talking later, she told me she had been frustrated that morning, and I said, "I thought so. I heard you yelling at the guys." She looked confused and a little hurt at that assumption. She told me she does not yell at her boys. I believed her because she has this warmth about her that makes you feel at home instantly. I asked my friend about it, though, and he said he could not even remember a time when his mom actually yelled at him for something. Getting yelled at was almost a daily occurrence in my house, even for things like throwing away trash the wrong way or not washing the dishes the way my mom wanted. Story 9. Never hug or kiss their child. There should be no physical affection whatsoever and no words of affirmation or praise. Story 10. Cooking meat by covering it with water in a skillet and calling it done when the water is all gone. Using no spices except salt, also known as bland food. Story 11. My father was an alcoholic through most of my childhood. He was a regular at the local small-town liquor store. Our grandparents lived halfway across the country, so they used to mail us checks for Christmas or our birthdays. We would walk over to the liquor store, and they would pay us cash for the checks. Perfectly normal. It wasn't until I was nearly 30, and my sister and I were involved in a 12-step program called Adult Children of Alcoholics, that we were discussing how unusual our childhood was. My sister laughed at the realization that other people did not, as children, have check cashing facilities at the liquor store. Really not normal. Story 12. My dad wakes up at 10 a.m. only to take a nap around 2 p.m., then goes back to bed about 8 p.m., also falling asleep in his chair throughout the day. It turns out he was either on antipsychotic medication towards the end of my parents' marriage or on substances. Story 13. My mother was really difficult to deal with for me, and we would argue a lot. I just did not understand certain things, and she would never explain them and would just get angry. I had to sit on the stairs every time, including when friends were over, and they thought it was just so weird. At some point, I did not have to sit on the stairs anymore, but we still argued often. She was often gone on the weekends, which was so good for me, and I was mostly in my room or out when she was home. I have a way better relationship now that I am out of the house with her. I was thinking about breaking contact at first, but it got better from the moment I left. Since I was not with her, I could just go home. Besides that, we argue a lot less now. She still can be vague and difficult though. Story 14. My parents danced in the kitchen, slow dancing and fast dancing, singing with or without music. They were just happy to be in the same room together. It made a big impression on me. Story 15. My mom walks around the house fully naked sometimes. I brought it up casually in conversation, and it got awkward real fast. Story 16. I was raised by my grandparents and didn't realize they were alcoholics until I was 19. I just thought some people drank beer like how others would drink soda. It blew my mind when I realized. Story 17. When I heard my karate teacher say he never had a drop of alcohol in his life, I was so confused. I thought all adults drank when they got home because of stress. Story 18. Do not speak to me for days. Critique dinner changes. Categorize children. Never talk about anything below the surface or their own interests. Have conversations that are exclusively real-world math problems for hours, which is how my dad and I connected. My husband says my whole family is autistic, and now I see they definitely are. Story 19. Hating your spouse and constantly fighting. Telling your kids everything you do not like about them. I was truly shocked when I met one of my high school friends' families and everybody loved and supported each other. I thought they were strange. Story 20. Both my parents have Doctor of Philosophy degrees. I thought everyone was supposed to go to college and get Doctor of Philosophy degrees until I was around middle school age. Story 21. My parents smoke all the time, especially when my siblings and I are present. It doesn't matter if it is in the house, in the car, at a sports event, or outside of school. Story 22. My parents told me they did not indulge in friendships or go out without us, because they loved us so much they did not want to do anything other than be with us. They looked down on people who hired babysitters or had social lives without their children. I think it was actually a fear of open spaces and being incredibly dull. Story 23. I was never told that I was loved or cared about. When I got older and heard my friends' parents say that they love their children to their faces, I thought there was something wrong with them. Story 24. Endurance training using the kitchen instruments. But not gonna lie, lifting that mixer again and again gave me a strong back. Story 25. I was taught that you do not enter or leave a room, anywhere including at home, without acknowledging the people in the room. It was rude and disrespectful. It has been so hard to retrain this behavior. I cannot say I am there yet, but at least I can no longer get offended if someone walks out of a room without saying something. I have also learned to joke when someone calls me out for announcing a trip to the bathroom. Story 26. Turn every conversation into an argument. The air was thick with hostility at all times, even in public. Even the most innocent joke could be construed as an insult, and those were always met with hostile reactions. I never even knew home could be a place to relax. Story 27. My dad would smoke a metal cigarette. I did not realize that it was not actually a normal cigarette until I smelled marijuana for the first time at a party. Story 28. Keep 6 months of food and water in the house at all times. We rotated them a couple of times a year as part of spring and fall cleaning. We also practiced getting out of the house to go camping in 30 minutes or less, and now I know this was bug-out practice. Story 29. Limit all food in the house. I was not allowed to eat anything unless asked, and most of the time it was a no. Additionally, I was put in a weight management program at the age of 10 because I was a little overweight. Story 30. If it is yellow, let it mellow. If it is brown, flush it down. We were only allowed to flush the toilet if we pooped. Urine stayed in the toilet to save water. Still to this day, when I go to their house, the toilets are always full of urine. It is unpleasant, but I never thought anything of it when I lived there. I could only imagine what my friends thought when they came over and had to use the bathroom. Story 31. Very often, one of my parents would say something completely normal. The other would not hear them. The first one would start raising their voice to be heard, and the listener would get angry because their spouse is raising their voice at them. Then they would argue over whether that counts as raising their voice or not. I thought this was normal. It actually only happens when both people have poor hearing and worse social skills. Story 32. Sorry to be wholesome, but being clearly fond of you, checking in with you just because, and being beamingly proud of you made me sad when I realized my friends did not all receive the same treatment. Story 33. Only being allowed to socialize at school with no other contact with anyone until the next morning. I was also walked to school until I was 14 or 15. Story 34. If someone was mad at you, they complained to someone else who then told you. You argued with the representative. It was mostly my mother who did this, and it was never direct. Story 35. I thought going into bathrooms was fine. So when my dad would be showering and I came home from school or something, I would go into the bathroom to wash my hands. I never thought anything of it until I mentioned it when I was maybe 19 in a conversation with friends. They made me feel pretty weird about it, saying that it's not normal, and at first I thought they were joking. Story 36. Get completely intoxicated in front of the children, taking us to the bar, giving us smaller cups and putting a child-sized amount of beer in it. The list is pretty long and mostly involves alcohol. Story 37. My mother regularly discussed her difficult marriage with me and why she wanted to leave my father. She stayed because of my sister and me, and how she sacrificed so much for us. She was actually in love with someone else who emigrated, and she thinks about him a lot. I was 10 or 11 when that started. Then there were all the declarations of why has God given me these awful kids? If we screwed up in any way. I thought all marriages were like this and all kids were as unhappy as I was. I dreamed about running away or being rescued by a new mom and dad who would love me. Now, no matter how mad my husband and I might be with one another over whatever trivial matter, we never let the kids see it. I let them know all the time that we are lucky to have such great kids and how proud we are of the young adults they have become. I realized when I became a mom that yes, it's hard work, but it's so unbelievably easy just to be a decent human being to them. Still, at 45, I haven't stood up to my mother. Story 38. Being nice, friendly, and generous with people outside, but at home, they were always angry, depressed, arguing, and never had positive emotions. I thought it was normal and started doing the same. At home, I was sad and depressed, but the moment I saw someone outside of my family, I began smiling and being funny, always in a good mood. After many years, I understood how wrong it was. Story 39. Fear that I was going to be yelled at with every mistake I made and then given the silent treatment. It is okay to make mistakes now and learn from them, and also to know that I will not be yelled at or belittled. Story 40. When my mother was putting on her makeup before going to work at 7 a.m., she always had a coffee mug of rum next to her. I didn't realize until I was a teenager that this was not a normal thing. Mom was an alcoholic and literally needed a drink in the morning to get her through the day. She eventually damaged her liver and died in her mid-50s. Story 41. Not mine, but my ex's parents would not allow a lock on the bathroom door, and everyone had to sleep with their doors ajar. When I first stayed over at their house while visiting, we closed the door. 30 minutes later, we heard someone walk past and push it open enough to see inside. I closed it again and was like, "What was that?" 5 minutes later, it happened again. So I peeked out and saw her mother going back to her room. She thought everyone's houses were like that. Story 42. Eat dinner while watching television every single night. Part of my childhood, I know we had a table in the kitchen dining nook because I have seen it in pictures. However, I have no memory of eating at it. We all had different spots in the kitchen or living room from which to watch shows like Full House, Survivor, Big Brother, and CSI while eating dinner. I am thankful we were together. I do not mean to complain about having a family eating peacefully in the same space, never worrying about having enough to eat. It's just that I didn't realize that eating at a table and having conversation every night was kind of the ideal, and that my parents, at some point, apparently decided we do not do that. Story 43. When we went to our church, we shook and lurched all over the church floor. I don't know why, we had always just gone there. Story 44. Kind of a twist on this question because it was the neighbor child that found this out about his own parents. We invited the neighbor child over for dinner because he was friends with my little brother. My brother was probably around 9 or 10, so the neighbor child was 7 or 8. We were all sitting around the table, mom, dad, me, little brother, neighbor, child. My family was talking, laughing, and making silly jokes, the same as always. One of us noticed the neighbor child wasn't eating or drinking, just sitting there looking at us with confusion and wonder on his face. My dad asked him if he was okay, and he said, "You guys get to talk and laugh at the dinner table?" We assured him that, yes, that was a normal thing to do, and he told us his dad didn't allow anyone to say anything at dinner. Everyone sat around the table in terrified silence, and when the dad was done, everyone was done. You threw your food in the trash, put your dishes in the sink, and left the dining room. The guy was obviously a psychopath. The neighbor child turned out okay, and as far as I know, so did his sisters. What a challenging childhood. Story 45. My American mother and English father married and eloped to South Africa in the 1970s, alienating all my extended family in the United States and the United Kingdom. I grew up being told that they were the enemy and not to be trusted. Wild times. Story 46. They remained good friends after their divorce. They liked and loved each other but could not live together. As they always said, "If you are not better together, you are better apart." Unfortunately, my first wife preferred to hate each other after our divorce, despite the fact that we had young children and had to be civil at least. That was an unpleasant surprise for me. Story 47. Not spend any quality time together. Mom would watch television and drink in the bedroom, and Dad would play poker in the computer room. It wasn't until years later, when I was around friends and partners' families more, that I realized parents actually do spend time together if they like each other. My parents are divorced now, so that made a lot of sense. Story 48. My father would not let my mother go out. He was really verbally abusive to her, and she was only allowed out to go grocery shopping and shopping for him within a very strict spending limit. If she needed to spend more on something like feminine hygiene products, or school lunches, or supplies, he would get really angry. He also never let her use the washing machine, even though we had one. I thought most dads were like that. It was very normalized where I grew up. Story 49. The whole, "I work all day to come home to this. Stop crying or I will give you something to cry about. And my dad was awful to me. Do not make me act like that to you, generally all because you were feeling sick, so you did not look happy. You washed the dishes but did not put them away, or, God forbid, you have washed the dishes, but someone used a spoon long after you finished, so it is sitting, waiting to be cleaned." Story 50. My mom used to talk to herself in full voice with her inner monologue, reading aloud everything she saw. It turns out that she was more than just a little bit odd. She was very much on the autism spectrum. I asked her doctor about this before she went into the nursing home. I was told that people born in 1931 could not possibly be autistic. Story 51. When my mom worked as a sewing machine operator, she would call all 9 of us kids throughout the day to check in on us. She would ask how we were doing and what was new. Some of us were on the West Coast and some of us were on the East Coast. She knew everything about everybody and would update each of us on our siblings. She kept us together. She still does. She retired last year, so she doesn't call as often. But now she invites us to her house for lunch most Sundays. My husband calls her the godmother. But it's in a good way. I'm really close to all my siblings, and it's because of my parents, especially my mom. Most people, I've come to learn as an adult, don't have this. I am so thankful to have such a great role model, and I hope to do this for our kids. Story 52. All of my parents' responsibilities fell onto me as soon as I could drive. I wasn't allowed to go out without one of my younger siblings. There was constant arguing and yelling. They only cared when my siblings were participating in approved sports. They would sit on me randomly until I couldn't breathe and laugh about it. I had to quit Taekwondo because my little brother's wrestling was considered more important. Friends couldn't come over unless they knew their parents well, as in knowing everything about them. Story 53. My parents used to flick me in the face if I didn't do what they wanted or didn't act right. Like if I was giving them attitude or if I was annoying them. It hurt every time, more than when I was spanked. I mentioned it to someone once, and they were like, "What are you talking about?" I didn't know that wasn't normal. Story 54. Threw out most of my Halloween candy. It would just disappear until I got older and realized it was being thrown away. At least I was allowed 2 pieces for about 3 days. It wasn't until I was an adult that I tried different kinds of candy, sugary cereal, and fast food. Story 55. Using toilet paper as tissues. I always thought it was normal until one day I brought toilet paper to school and was questioned about why I didn't use actual tissues. Story 56. Bullying is affecting one of 3 children and not caring that a 12-year-old lives with friends for months at a time, while knowing there is no adult present at my friend's house, as well as no heating or warm water. It hit me like a ton of bricks when my coworkers talked about not letting their children stay out for a few days in a row. I didn't understand why it would be an issue until they told me that parents not caring is neglect. I didn't share why I stayed away from home as much as possible. Story 57. Having an alcoholic, bipolar mother growing up desensitizes you to a lot of things. I do not know where to begin on it. I guess that feeling of being more at home outside of your home comes to mind. I do not know how else to explain that feeling. Like, you feel joy and wonder when you are away from home, but once you get home, all that joy and wonder disappears. Story 58. My parents, particularly my father, insisted that every family had crazy family stories like ours. They just didn't feel the need to share those stories with everyone. Then I got to college and found out other people's ideas of a crazy family story are very, very different from mine. I accidentally upset my friends more than once with what I thought was a normal story to share. Wow, your dad told you the ice cream truck only plays music when it is out of ice cream? Mine only told me that rat poison is squirrel candy and let me feed a squirrel some. It was great. I thought I had a pet for the day. We even gave it a bath with the hose. Story 59. Your mom is not able to drive you anywhere or pick you up after 6 p.m. every day because she has already started drinking. I mean, the positive side is that she didn't drink and drive. Story 60. Making us eat on the floor so we didn't get our mom's dining room table dirty. I thought it was normal since we had to do it for so long. I didn't realize how wrong it was until my mom started dating her ex-husband and he came over for dinner. He demanded that we eat at the table because he refused to see us get treated like animals. Story 61. I thought physical abuse was normal until my early teens. I remember joking with some classmates about the morning's beating being especially rough when they asked about bruises and cuts. I did not understand why they were uncomfortable and did not want to be friends. Story 62. Being hit to be disciplined. I know people used to do that, so while yes, it's still not okay, I just accepted my parents were old school, as they like to say. Then I met someone who actually grew up that way for me to realize that the way they beat me and for what things was not just for discipline but straight up abuse. I don't agree with the old school parenting style, but realizing that what my parents did was far worse than just that was not a fun realization. Story 63. My parents would audibly have discussions even when I had friends sleeping over. They kept their adult movies with the regular movies by the video cassette recorder in the living room. My dad watched inappropriate content on the computer while we were watching television or doing homework in the same room. I knew it wasn't normal behavior, but it was just accepted in my house. Even extended family knew about it. He had the most money of all his siblings. Money buys permission for horrible behavior. Story 64. Never hugged me. As it turns out, people hug a lot even just as a way to say hello. First, it was awkward, but I think I really like it. Hugs are pretty lovely. Story 65. We never had hand soap in my house growing up. We washed our hands with dish detergent or just a bar of soap in most cases. It wasn't until I was in advanced individual training and my friend saw me using dish soap to wash my hands that he pointed out how crazy that looked, and I bought some nice scented hand soap and I can't go back. In hindsight, my dad was a construction worker and mechanic, so he was always coming in with his hands very dirty, so maybe it made sense to use something more heavy duty, and I just followed his lead as a kid. Story 66. Being left in the car for hours on a Saturday while my mom and dad drank at a Legion. Mostly my dad. This could be any Legion. If we were traveling and there was a Legion, my dad would stop for a quick beer or 2 or 3. Story 67. Very pointed jokes. Getting obnoxiously drunk and invading my personal space, arguments and fighting, not sleeping in the same room. Story 68. Methamphetamine. Selling it from the house, using it, engaging in it while we were home, and then taking us on strange methamphetamine-fueled adventures. while normalizing drug discussions and vocabulary to elementary school children. Story 69. Not me, but an ex of mine said her parents liked to walk around the house naked, and that she had to warn her parents when her friends were coming over. Story 70. It took me a while to realize that drinking alcohol at 8 a.m., staying up all night for no apparent reason, and smoking bongs all day every day while not having a job was not normal. Thank you, Dad, for showing me what not to do with my life. Story 71. I thought it was normal that most people were alienated from the rest of their family. We never had family reunions or kept in close contact, especially with those on my father's side. I later found out my father was considered the black sheep of the family because he left the area to join the Navy and didn't send as much money home to support his mother as his brothers thought he should. He and my mother had 5 children on a military salary, so I don't imagine there was a lot to spare. My mother's immediate family was fractured because of one uncle, and I am not going into that. Their dysfunction trickled down to us kids. I couldn't figure out why my own family was so messed up until I started working in psychiatry. There, I realized there's no figuring out or fixing some things, which I had tried to do all my life. That was a huge revelation. I'm older now and make a point to love my found family and not waste time on those who aren't worth my efforts. I don't try to have a healthy relationship with the rest of them and have finally learned to set boundaries and limit expectations with my siblings. Story 72. All our butter knives had the ends burnt and discolored. For those who do not know, back in the strict anti-drug days, when finding the accessories for cannabis consumption was hard to come by, one method of smoking hash was using hot knives. You heat the ends of 2 knives to a dull red on the stove while you divide a hash chunk into pea-sized bits. When ready, you take one knife and gently dab it on a hash crumb and quickly squeeze it with the other hot knife. This makes it combust without actual flame. You then lean in close and inhale the smoke. I remember my mother complaining about her guests doing it. Not for ruining a couple of knives, but because they always picked a good set. They would never use the already ruined knives from previous days. Story 73. My father used to make me stand in a corner for hours, and if he even thought I let out a tear, he would start the timer over again. When I was older and they repainted the room, my tear marks were still on the wall. Story 74. My dad used to boast about his experiences in prison and about the crimes he and his friends committed. When I went to people's houses and heard their dads boast about their new promotion at work or completing a 5-kilometer race, I was like, but did you sell drugs or rob any houses? Story 75. Put a big emphasis on birthdays and holidays. Growing up now and having friends and partners not celebrate as much as my parents did, or even really at all unless I ask, because it is just a birthday or it is just a Hallmark holiday or Christmas is just an excuse to get pointless gifts. It is crazy how no one else seems to view these holidays and special occasions with as much celebration and importance as I grew up with. Story 76. Arguing with all of their brothers, sisters, and relatives, both my mother and my father, about something related to money and inheritance. Thanks to that, I basically never met my cousins, just a couple of times during those Christmases when they were all miraculously on speaking terms. Now I am 42, and I do know it was wrong for many reasons, but it still feels normal to me. When I see friends or colleagues with strong bonds with their cousins, I am still taken aback. Like, you hang out with your relatives? Story 77. Refer to black people as the N-word and Arabic or Indian people as sand N-word. They made me help raise my reproductively irresponsible uncle's football team, plus a number of children. Story 78. Smoking a tobacco pipe everywhere at all times. Bathroom, car, bedroom, kitchen, and more. Always having a beer in hand. Storing empty beer cans and bottles in random drawers in the garage. It turns out this was my dad trying to hide the alcoholism that later led to their divorce. Story 79. Bicker and fight loudly. They had no way to communicate properly. I carried that into my first marriage, thinking it was normal and that he had issues too. Took me years to understand that it wasn't okay. Story 80. Mom told me if I went to bed with wet hair, I would go blind, or if I slept with socks on, it would cut my circulation and I would die. Story 81. No boundaries, very few clear rules, and no known punishments or consequences. A lot of the time, I did not know I was doing anything wrong until after I was being punished for it. Usually, the punishment involved being yelled at, but other times it consisted of things like the silent treatment. Story 82. I have many siblings from different parents. When I told this at school or to an adult, they always looked at me strangely, and for me, it was completely normal. I was happy to share it. Nowadays, I understand. Story 83. Normal mothers do not ask their daughters for relationship advice. She was really just digging for sympathy. Story 84. Tell a kindergartner that she should start shaving her legs. I was fair and had dark leg hair, nothing excessive. Story 85. Never reconciling in front of us after an argument. My two younger siblings and I would hear arguments across the tiny house, but never witness resolution. Also, my dad and mom were always yelling at me when I messed up, including receiving bad grades in subjects no one could help me with, as well as talking back when asked to explain anything, and not being trusted when I genuinely made mistakes. My mom only ever sometimes apologized, and even then mostly only after her cancer returned. It took me 5 to 10 years to figure out that this was not normal, and I am still dealing with the effects more than 10 years after her passing. Additionally, my dad is a right-wing conspiracy theorist. It took a while for that to come to light, but now here I am, more than 10 years later, doing my best to juggle my life and not lose my sisters, who also coincidentally do not speak to each other. I am slowly losing my mind and do not know what to do, as therapy is not yet a choice for a variety of reasons. Story 86. Summer vacation trip. My parents were working remotely before high-speed internet, and each summer we would travel about 4 days to see my grandparents for a few weeks, then travel back home before school started. We would take slightly different routes or be sure to visit the same places again. Story 87. Being selfish and narcissistic, refusing to treat me like an individual and not holding themselves to the same standards they pretend to stand for. Story 88. I realized today I never saw my parents drink anything that wasn't caffeinated or alcoholic. Or if I did, I can't remember any instances. I don't think I even remember them drinking water, but I remember my mom trying to force me to drink more of it. Story 89. My dad was obsessed with being up to date with technology and would constantly swap out devices if they were too old. He replaced our televisions, phones, computers, and my Game Boy whenever a new and improved model was available. When I met my now husband, I was surprised to see he still had some old consoles and his television was 10 years old at the time. They were all happy with it. So was I, because I missed playing Super Mario 64. Story 90. Staying up for 4 days straight, taking apart appliances, painting random things, and organizing the same drawer repeatedly. Story 91. My dad would compare me to other women in the street to tell me I am more beautiful than they are. It happened often enough that I got used to it, but one time when I was 13, he started it again while I was in the car with him. I just told him I did not sign up to be in a competition against them, and he yelled and hit the steering wheel. Meeting my partner and then their family, my partner's dad does not do any comparing or make weird comments. This made me realize my dad is not normal. My mom would call me ugly to my face and laugh, then call me beautiful afterward. When I broke down and said I would never be pretty, I would never be beautiful, and I might as well die, she backpedaled quickly and tried to comfort me. I was 8 or 9 years old. My parents are now retired, and I do not actively go out of my way to talk to them. A lot of what they did was out of survival, but while there was reason, it does not excuse their terrible parenting. Part of me still loves them, but I never want to be in the same room as them for any longer than 2 minutes. Story 92. I thought it was pretty normal to hit and scream at your children until I got to high school. Then I started to realize how dysfunctional my house was compared to my friends' homes. Story 93. Being woken up in the morning suddenly from yelling and door slamming by parents or siblings later developed severe anxiety and led to becoming hypervigilant. Story 94. Smoking. I had no clue it was considered dirty or trashy. I knew it was really bad for your health, but there was no overall negative connotation. Story 95. Only child raised by a single mom. I was told regularly how proud she was of my accomplishments. Fast forward 35 years. My fiance's 17-year-old got accepted to a graphic design program at school. When she texted me and told me, I said, "That's great. I am so proud of you and all the hard work you put into this." And she replied with, "I honestly think this is the first time anyone has ever said they're proud of me. Why don't people encourage their kids more?" Story 96. Our toilet seat was broken for a significant part of my childhood, and I thought it was a big deal to replace it. A few years ago, I moved into my own place, and my toilet seat broke. I bought a new one for about €20, and it took just 5 minutes to replace it. My parents are not careless and have a beautiful house, which makes it even more puzzling. Story 97. When my younger brother and I would argue, my dad would grab our heads and bang them together. It wasn't a light tap either. I'm pretty sure now there were a few concussions. I never realized this was abuse until I was in my 20s, just retelling a story, and everyone looked horrified. Story 98. My parents were farmers and grew up on farms during the Great Depression and World War II. I never saw evidence that they ever took a shower or a bath, and they were not dirty. They only took sink baths. Story 99. Reading. My mom read to us every night until we were old enough to read on our own, and then we read in our rooms before we went to bed. Story 100. Oh, here's another one. I went to Catholic conditioning class. I can't remember the true meaning of the letters. In the class, they told us that Catholics were persecuted, and it was scary to be Catholic. But when I read history, I feel like others would say that about Catholics. I did that once a week, went to church once a week, and did Sunday school once a week. We had a Sunday tradition. We were the last ones there most Sundays. But we sat in the same spot every week, like everyone else. Is confession not practiced in every religion? Lent is apparently not a common thing. I tried to explain the baby that's hidden in the cake on Fat Tuesday, then going to Ash Wednesday and 40 days of sacrifice and no meat. Is this normal or is it not? Story 101. My mother and aunt did topless. As a kid, it was considered normal. As a teenager, it was awkward and weird. As a post-teen, it felt really awkward. As an adult, there are no words. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.